So welcome to Create Connects. Hope you can all hear me okay. If there are any technical problems, it's likely they might be your personal technical problems. I think we can all mostly see and hear me now. Okay, welcome to Create Connects. Today we're covering playing musical instruments in groups, hopefully in most contexts. The advice I'm giving you today has been offered or confirmed by New South Wales Health, SafeWork New South Wales and the Department of Education Training in New South Wales. Before we start, I would like to acknowledge that all of us here are located somewhere on Aboriginal land across this vast place we now call New South Wales. I live and work on Gadigal and Bidjigal lands and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. My name is Beck Dean and I'm an Acting Senior Manager in Policy and Partnerships at Create New South Wales. There are a number of my Create New South Wales colleagues on this platform, Merrilee Ray, Ivana Jovanovic and Tammy Close, who'll help moderate these questions as we go. So there's a chat box on the right hand side of this window and it's got a little speech bubble. You may open that and please submit your questions or comments into there. Also say hello if you want to. I'm joined today by Stephen O'Doherty, who is from Rivmio, who's been doing a lot of advocacy work on behalf of this particular part of the arts and culture sector. I did want to start by just acknowledging that it's been very, very tough for everyone, particularly in live performance and areas of live performance practice. And I'm hoping that we're starting to see a little bit of light emerge through this kind of quite difficult time, and that we might be able to resume practice moving forward. There's some great people from AI Media who are captioning this webinar, so please you can see the link if you need that link in the chat box. And the webinar is also being recorded so that we can make it available to everybody over the next few weeks. We're going forward with the advice for musical instrument activities, including bands, orchestras, community bands. So the New South Wales Health advice was updated on the 24th of September. If we go to the next bit of that slide, please. Yeah. So this was extended, basically, it started as advice to schools and it's been extended into all areas and contexts. So this is the detail. Musical instrument ensembles may continue. Players of non-reeded woodwind instruments, such as flutes and recorders, should maintain a physical distance of 3 metres from others in the direction of airflow from the instruments and 1.5 metres in all other directions. Players of all other musical instruments, including reeded woodwind instruments, should maintain a physical distance of 1.5 metres in between each other and the audience and conductor. Ensembles and other musical groups should rehearse and perform outdoors in large, well-ventilated indoor spaces. So I'll just clarify a bit around non-reeded woodwind. So we're talking about flutes, recorders, whistles, piccolos, things that have an unimpeded kind of stream of air coming out of them. So for brass instruments, you can follow the 1.5 because of the vibrations inside the those instruments actually creating a different kind of airflow. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So this is the advice for musical instruments in classrooms. So musical instrument activities can proceed. Students playing non-reeded woodwind instruments such as flutes and recorders should be positioned so they can maintain a physical distance of 1.5 metres from all persons, including other members of the musical group. They must also maintain a minimum 3 metres space between the direction of airflow from their instruments and other performers. So it's important to note that this information from New South Wales Health is classified as advice in relation to this kind of practice, rather than a rule or a law that is written into the current public health order. So it isn't a punishable or finable offence to deviate from this advice. However, Create New South Wales encourages the arts and culture community to heed the advice of New South Wales Health wherever it's possible to do so. So the sort of governing principle around this is that non-reeded woodwind instruments can, in the context of COVID-19, if someone were infected, it can transmit aerosols over a greater distance than normal speaking or the playing of those other instruments. So the distance of that's given of 3 metres between the direction of airflow of these instruments is to limit the possibility that that act of playing can transmit the virus onto others. So can we go to the next slide, please? So working in the education context, this current advice is also correct at the time of this presentation. So only providers that are essential to the delivery of curriculum can continue to provide services and programs until further notice. Parents and carers and other non-essential visitors are not allowed on the school site unless volunteering for educational purposes. Singing and band rehearsals and performances should take place outside or in well-ventilated indoor spaces. So if we can go to the next slide. So we understand that there's many professional and community contexts for playing instruments. And at this time, this is the advice that we have from New South Wales Health. However, there's a lot of work that's currently being done, and we are imagining that there'll be an announcement very, very shortly. We were hoping that announcement would be actually made prior to this webinar, so that I could take you through it, but it's likely to come very shortly from New South Wales Health that will support a return to community music under similar kinds of lines to the way that community sport has been able to operate. So you've all registered for this webinar, and I hope that I can take you through that information. I'll email you when the announcement is made, and hopefully it will alleviate some of the pressures that the community area particularly is facing. For those of you who are in the business of music, there's some advice from SafeWork. So we understand that, you know, orchestras, bands, you're getting back to work because theatres are open. Theatres are open, people are going back to the theatre, we need to put something on the stage. So in this case, SafeWork have issued this advice. So I'll just take you through it, and then I'll explain it in simple terms afterwards. So professional performance organisations are workplaces and are subject to work, health and safety legislation. Any person conducting a business or undertaking has a responsibility under work health and safety legislation and is required to consult with others to manage risk. We can go to the next slide. Work health and safety principles should be applied to minimise the risk of transmission of COVID-19 among performers, staff and audiences. For example, through increased physical distancing and improved ventilation in indoor settings. Organisations should implement comprehensive COVID-19 safety plans, and the onus is on professional performance organisations as employers, in consultation with their staff, to develop appropriate plans and ensure compliance with such plans. Go to the next slide. Purpose-built venues and their associated permanent workplaces may have an opportunity to implement specific work practices and engineering controls that may not be viable for infrequent performances in a community setting. These tailored controls may help augment the approach to meeting the necessary public health outcomes. Where tailored controls are employed, New South Wales Health recommends that organisations obtain specialist professional advice to verify the effectiveness of measures. So if we could go to the next slide. So what does this mean? So if your organisation needs to undertake work with musicians, bands, orchestras that deviates from the advice issued by New South Wales Health, and because I guess the advice for musicians is not as restrictive as that for singing. We're actually probably talking about the amount of people you have or the number of people that you have on stage and in closer proximity to one another. I would imagine that would be the main issue that you're dealing with. So if you need to deviate from this plan to be 1.5 metres away from another musician in your band, then you'll need to professionally manage this risk in and for your workplace and for your workers. So as with all businesses, you need to develop and submit a detailed COVID safe plan for your workplace. And you'll need to get an external consultant to check your risk management protocols. So this could be an independent epidemiologist or an occupational health and safety consultant. And once you've kind of got this plan together, you need to inform everyone that's working in your organisation of your plan, your risk mitigations, your responsibilities to them, and then everybody commit to complying with this plan. So in terms of the COVID safe planning, there's some great guidelines that have already been produced by Live Performance Australia, LPA, and the Live Entertainment Industry Forum. So they've done these great plans that cover up a whole range of different kinds of practice and settings. So if you're doing a rehearsal or if you're going into production, and there's plans for venues and plans for producer presenters as well. So if you feel like you just don't have anything to work with and all of this is just a bit too challenging, there's some great guidelines and resources there for you to start with, and I really encourage you to take a look at those, but also to be mindful that these plans and guidelines have been produced in relation to an Australia-wide application. And as we know, the situation with this virus is very different as we move state to state, and it's very different in terms of the way that state and territory governments are responding to the virus. So obviously Queensland gets brought up a lot because their guidelines are much more less restricted at the moment for these sorts of activities, but of course we know that Queensland is also in a different place in relation to its management of COVID-19 and where it's at with community transmissions being at a very low and zero level for quite a long time. So that's the information from the Live Entertainment Industry Forum and LPA, and we're going to put those links up on our website as well so that you can download them, but they're also in the chat box here. Moving on, next slide please. So obviously you do your work in a lot of different places, and by the end of today or tomorrow I'm really hoping that there is another option for you that will be able to be announced. But obviously all of these places have different COVID risk profiles, and therefore they have different capacity limitations that have been applied to them in the public health order. So by risk profile, I mean human behaviour and human activity in these places is different, and so they've been looked at as different kinds of premises. So when you go into these places, you need to be aware of what the public health orders are surrounding them. So can we move on to the next slide? Ooh, I think we went too far. Oh, here we go. So You will be aware that theatres, cinemas and concert halls have recently had their capacities lifted to 50% seated capacity, which is a great outcome and kind of shows that we're on a good path, I think, to starting to open up our sector again and get back to work. But you'll also have noticed in the media there's a lot of talk about increasing capacities in other environments and contexts. And it's likely that this advice will also be undergoing change shortly. So obviously there's been a lot of questions about why is this different? Why is the community centre different to a theatre? Why is a club different to a theatre? And those questions are being addressed presently. So I'm hoping that we'll have some movement on that shortly, and I will keep people in touch around those issues as well. So when you're going into, oh, sorry, back to that one. When you're going into a venue as a sort of, you know, in a working context, whether you're working with volunteers or whether you're working with paid workers, it's really, I think it's important that you develop a COVID safe plan anyway, because, you know, you never know what is going to happen with this virus, and it really is a great idea to keep yourself as safe as possible and keep people that are working with you as informed as possible as well. And also, as we've noted, New South Wales Health it pushes out sort of two different kinds of things. One of which is like the public health order and the restrictions that are placed on different kinds of gatherings. The other is a range of checklists, and the checklists relate to venues and premises. So there's two different kinds of things going on, and the venue that you will take your work into will likely have its own COVID safe plan, and that COVID safe plan will be relating to the presentation of work. And so you basically need to make sure that those things cohere. So, for instance, I've had quite a lot of questions about the 20-person rule for gatherings, but if you're inside a venue, that doesn't apply. So you can, if you need to do a production with a lot more people than 20 people on stage, then as long as you have your COVID safe plan in place and your venue has a COVID safe plan in place, you should be able to undertake those activities. So it's really, those 20-person gatherings are really for activities that are outside of work, that are outside of the process of creating entertainment for people, but also that 20-person gathering is really very much focused around outside activities at the moment. But as I say, I hope that we are going to have some changes for community music around that very soon, because we all know that outdoors is better in terms of ventilation, so the work is being done on that. Okay, so we've had some questions submitted, so we can go to those now. The question oh, here we go. Stephen is going to be Stephen is going to be giving me the hard-hitting questions that I have to answer.
No, I'll be helping. Can I just say that it's important, I think, for most of the people who are watching now, although I don't know who you are, but I'm assuming most of you are conducting groups of some description, and the WorkSafe legislation, as I understand it, legal disclaimer, check with your own lawyer, please. Whether you're a volunteer or whether your organisation is voluntary or not, you would be considered a workplace, most likely be considered a workplace under the WorkSafe legislation. So you will need to do a COVID plan, and certainly it's recommended that you do a WorkSafe plan for your activity. And that'll include having band rehearsals, working in a school. So if you're a contractor going into a school, the school requires you to have a COVID safe plan that fits within their COVID safe plan. And I know that it's there's a lot of work involved of a legal nature to try to get your head around it. The health department side makes it as simple as possible for us. And there are a few people have shared the link for the health department site that takes you through step by step making a plan. But as Beck has rightly said, you've got a health order, that's the law. The law imposes restrictions on venues, not activities. There's advice about our activity, and it's highly recommended you comply with that advice. And you should have I think you should have a COVID plan anyway, whether or not you deviate from the advice, because most of the places you play or work will require you to have a COVID plan. Furthermore, because we're considered to be workplaces, if we're conducting a band, wherever it may happen to be, we have a responsibility, your committee has a responsibility to look after both you as an employee, a contractor, whatever you may be, or a volunteer, and all of those people who participate, so the other members of your band, even if it's a community association. Is anything I said there, Beck?
No, I think that's absolutely, thank you for qualifying those things as well, because I think, you know, above all things, it's really about, and it's not just, I mean, we are in a pandemic, it's a real thing. And really, I think for the benefit of you and the people that you work with, having a COVID safe plan, having people understand it and understand what it means, so that if they're feeling a bit iffy, if they're feeling a bit ill, they just don't turn up, you know. And that everybody understands that this is the way that we move forward on this and keep each other safe. So yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Now let me encourage people to throw particular questions up on the screen, and I'll help field them with Beck, because it's very hard to read and talk at the same time, isn't it, Beck?
It is.
Can I just say, while you're typing your questions, RIVMEO is an organisation that came together a month or so ago, and it has a lot of organisations already members, the Band Association, ABODA, as well as large companies such as the Sydney Symphony Orchestra and Gondwana Singers, and so it goes on. We represent the interests of music teachers, peripatetic teachers, and we've been doing a lot of work with health and create and education to try to normalise this activity, what people are now calling COVID normal. And I think it's probably, it's as good a phrase as any, but what we said to government was, look, the response to the risk of transmission by aerosols was quite devastating in its effects on the music sector. We're not saying it wasn't necessary. In fact, we've seen research that does show that COVID has been transmitted in New South Wales in a choir setting, and people became ill who weren't otherwise symptomatic, who had no other reason to be symptomatic. So New South Wales Health has confirmed that link, and many people on social media and elsewhere are referring to other studies. New South Wales Health, to our satisfaction, has confirmed the link between choir singing and people getting COVID and becoming extremely ill and indeed dying. So if that's the reality, that is the reality we're living with. We want to all stay safe as musicians. We want our audiences and our colleagues to stay safe. How can we do that in a way that's sustainable, proportionate to the risk, based on evidence, and equitable with other sectors? And we've been working now with the departments I mentioned for some time to bring about some changes. So changes took place for education, and probably a lot of folk are wondering about how they engage with education. Education brought out some new advice last week. Many people were on holidays, and in fact, even last night I found people on social media suddenly coming across this new advice saying, hey, we can play again in term 4. So the advice, there is an opening up of music in schools. Significantly, the advice contains this, and a few people have been wanting to clarify this. There's the issue of external providers and whether or not they closely relate to the curriculum. I'll read you a paragraph from the New South Wales Education Department's advice. Incursions or external providers can provide activities that support the delivery of curriculum, and then it says in brackets, e.g. music tutors. It goes on to say sports programs, science demonstrations, drama tutors, and even Healthy Harold is back, which is great news for life education. But that wasn't there previously, and a few people that have engaged with us at RIVMEO have actually missed that point. They're saying my principal still doesn't want band. My principal says band is thing, or I'm not central to the curriculum. No, the department's advice, and you're entitled to show this back to the principal, says external providers can provide activities that support curriculum, e.g. music tutors. And that's very welcome for those people who are so committed to their band programs. The other thing,
Stephen,
as Becca said,
I should get the link for that so that I can update the slide with that particular sentence. I think it's important to have it alongside the no people who aren't essential to the curriculum, but so that is listed as
absolutely. I'll endeavour to find that link and put it in the chat in a moment or two. We can just encourage you to type your questions into the chat box so that we can see them and answer any questions that you might have. The chat
Maybe
box
no one's
is
got questions. I'll go through these ones that we've got from the email. So there was questions on schools allowing community users to run band rehearsals, and unfortunately that is still not possible.
Well, it may be possible. Sorry, I'm not contradicting you. In discussions with the Department of Education, the first thing is they are extremely careful between now and the end of the HSC.
Yes.
And we can all understand the reason for that. There may be schools where because the activity is held in a separate room that is not used for the HSC, or there's no mixing, and this is the critical issue, no mixing between the external provider and the school community itself. It happens after hours, no one from the school is there. And you'd need to be able to show that you will clean the venue thoroughly after use, before and after use. So you'd need to have a COVID safety plan. In those cases, the principal may be able to allow you to return to using the hall as you used to, or whatever facility you used to use. But it's up to every principal, and there will be requirements as to safety. So it's a possibility, but have it out with your local principal.
Yes. So the other question: do outdoor wind band rehearsals need to follow the 20 people or less rule? Now this is imminently going to change. So at the moment, yes, the 20-person outside gathering unfortunately does apply, but we are about to see some change there to take place for music activity, and it should be.
We hope there'll be some good news soon.
Very soon. And I did go through this before, but regarding capacities for community venues, this is being worked on also presently. So the 4 square metre rule, or 50%, changed for theatres on the 25th of September, and we're likely to see some change for other spaces shortly as well. It's not the same as a theatre venue, because as I indicated previously, the risk profiles that New South Wales Health has for different kinds of venues is because they have different kinds of activities, different kinds of human behaviour going on in them, and that's why they're conceived as different. Now, the other thing that we have is a Service New South Wales has produced a QR code check-in. So a lot of organisations, when you're doing your rehearsals, or if you're opening a space so people can come into it, you might have a sign-in, or you might be using a third-party QR code provider. And that third-party provider will likely spam your members or people that use it with ads further down the track. And so Service New South Wales have developed a QR code app that you can, you'll get your own, once you've submitted a COVID safe plan, you get your own code for your activity or for your business. And then people can check in on that app. And basically it means that there is no third party between you and New South Wales Health on that particular information that is so crucial for contact tracing.
So a couple of questions here, Beck, that came in while you were talking. Can you talk to the issue of stage separation? And while you're there, could you also address this one? about the 4 square metre rule applying to professional orchestra pits?
I'm not sure where the 4 square metre rule is coming in, but if you're in a professional context, I think
They'll have a COVID safe plan. They'll have to have one.
You would have to have a COVID safe plan, and of course, you probably wouldn't be able to fit your orchestra in a pit if you had to follow those restrictions. And so, in order to get around that, or not, or to follow the plan as closely as possible, but not quite, you would need to put in other risk mitigations. So potentially that might include keeping a very close connection to your musicians and doing health checks with them, so that, because it's basically those musicians in that pit, that group of musicians in that pit, that would be impacted by anyone having COVID-19 and playing. So that might be one of the risk mitigations that you undertake to do. And then you might want to work with an occupational therapist or an epidemiologist to make sure that your processes seem okay. So,
probably worth pointing out, I mean, that we all need to live in this sustainable way. So the factors at play, according to the research that health is pointing to, include the concentrated buildup of aerosols. So one of the mitigating factors is time. Aerosols build up over time. The health advice is saying shorter rehearsals may be safer than longer rehearsals. For the same reason, good ventilation is absolutely recommended, and therefore outdoors is probably safer than indoors. And if you apply all of those things to a pit, that's something that would need to be very carefully looked at by those people who are managing that professional situation, and they certainly would have to have a COVID safety plan in place. Somebody has asked, can we get that last part in print? That's a 10D71. If you want to clarify that.
I think it was in relation to what you were talking about with
schools.
Certain kinds of providers being permitted if they were
so
part
Merrily,
of them.
Is it Merrily has just reposted? I couldn't post to everybody for some reason. So there's a link there to, it's the education advice for families. There's a link there back in the chat, and you'll need to scroll through and look at the external provider part, and then in a separate section you'll have the advice for musicians. Now, do schools need a COVID safe plan? Absolutely, yes, they do. Schools are exempt from the general orders, but they have their own orders, and they're working very hard. And schools in New South Wales have done a wonderful job, actually, compared with schools in other jurisdictions. And that's due to some pretty disciplined behaviour on the part of all of us, including us musicians, which is a point we've made to government.
Yeah.
Someone else has posted some stuff there. Yeah, can I double check that there's no limitation of numbers of musicians on stage, but only the 1.5 apart? My reading of that, Beck, would be the venue would have rules around that, but the advice from health is precisely what we've outlined. It's 1.5 metres now, which is the same as anyone in the community, except in the case of flutes and the health advice talk, and other non-reeded woodwind instruments. So flutes, recorders, panpipes, shakuhachi, whistles, you name it, slide whistles, whatever. So that, you have a think about that, percussionists. But in that case, the distance is, what is it, Beck, 5 metres in front?
It's 3 metres.
Right, 3 metres in front, and 5 metres from, in the education advice, it says 5 metres from conductor or audience.
That's for singing. That is for singing.
Sorry, that's singing. Yes, you're right. I apologise.
All gets very, all the meters.
Yeah, your head spins after doing this for long enough.
Yeah, I know.
So that's it. I mean, I think from a practical point of view, for a band, flutes are often usually going to be in the front row, unless you've got 2 ranks of flutes, so you'd have to space them. I'm doing a plan for my band at the moment that'll have that 3 metres in front of the flutes, and it's in the direction of airflow in regards to the health advice for instruments. The school's advice actually talks about, implies a radius. The health advice for community settings is in the direction of airflow. And as we know, flutes make their sound by vibrating the column of air to the side by blowing across the top of it, so that'll be in the front. But as flute players move around, you might want to think about just keeping people safe in that area in front of the flutes, and that's what we'll be doing in my band.
Someone's asking a question about kazoos.
Kazoos read it, isn't it? That's how it makes it sound.
Yeah, so I think the way that Laura has explained this to us in terms of instruments is that vibration, actually, the vibration of the reed or the vibration inside brass instruments kind of does the job of stopping that sort of aerosol flow. So that sort of that bouncing of those aerosols in the instrument itself. So I'd suggest that would be reeded.
The health advice, I think we can post to you.
Yeah,
just look for that.
I've just sent it to the organisers, so hopefully they can pop it into the chat.
Louise asks, "Can I share my stage plan?" It's not finished yet, Louise. If you're on Facebook, Rhythmio has its own Facebook page and group, and we're going to be working with Beck actually to develop some further advice for you to work out your own plans. I don't think it's that profound. It's 1.5 meters between players, 3 meters in front of flutes, the direction of airflow. It's not that profound. If you've got a big band, it's going to take up a big area, but look, I think it's important to keep people safe. Absolutely.
So I think it's also what we're hoping to do is, as we get more information, we update the website. There's a lot of, our website is just, the web page on this information is starting to get very long, and so I feel like we need to start doing some segmentation with that so that you can find the information easily and we can update it easily. Yes, it's really helpful to have industry guidelines and industry developed plans. So we've been previously posting plans from Sydney Opera House on our website and the art gallery. So I think we can sort of do similar things here, because they might not be too complex, but it also just, someone else's brain in the mix really helps when you're struggling and you're alone having to develop these things. So one of the good things that's come out of this pandemic, I should say, is that we are getting more connected. We're helping each other out a lot more. We're sharing material, and that gives me a lot of hope that we can sort of help each other to get find a way through this over the next few months.
So Louise asks the distance between accompanist and singer. Well, that'll be 5 meters.
That's correct.
If the singer is facing the accompanist.
Yeah.
So it's all to do with the direction of the airflow in terms of singers. And the health advice on singers, correct me, Beck, is it 1.5 meters between singers?
Yeah, so there's
3 meters
5 meters in front of anybody else, and 5 singers.
So if you're accompanying and you're singing, would you reckon it was fair to say that if your accompanist was behind you, it would be 1.5 rather than?
Yeah, I mean the advice is very clearly 5 meters from anyone else, but I'll get some feedback on that. I'll get some feedback on that, because it is very much about that airflow and the aerosols travelling forwards in one direction, and then 5 meters being, you know, what the sort of anticipated limit of that aerosol.
From a common sense point of view, I would think that the singer is often looking around to the accompanist. That's part of the performance protocol. So 5 meters would be the recommended distance if someone is singing at you or even talking loudly. Somebody in the choir webinar in the last session, Beck, was asking about a study that showed that singing was no worse than talking, or the words to that effect. Look, that study didn't look at group singing. It didn't look at the build-up of aerosols. But what it actually did say was that loud talking and loud singing, that the volume related to the airflow, and so it's not a helpful. Some people see that as a panacea. Oh, if you can talk, you can sing. Well, that doesn't help at all. Just don't. If you're talking loudly, and this is an issue for conductors who tend to project over the orchestra or band to talk to the back row, the tubas or whatever. That's an issue for us. So when we resume our band, I'll be using an amplifier rather than projecting my voice.
Yeah, and that's really, I mean, this is the thing that's coming out of, I guess, us working through this unprecedented situation, is coming up with alternative ways of doing things to support each other. Yeah. So there is a question that was answered in the last webinar, which is about multiple groups of 5 at 5 metres away from one another. Again, this is anything that falls outside of the New South Wales Health advice. You would need to get, I can't tell you that that's all right. You would need to do your own COVID-safe risk mitigation around that activity. But as we say, we're likely to have some changes for community music coming out very soon.
Which may not change the 1.5 metre issue. I think that is, I'd be asking an epidemiologist, how can I have more than 5, or how far apart can I space groups of 5 in order to be safer? What can I do to mitigate the risk? And that epidemiologist will need to take account of the room that you're singing in, or whether it's outdoors, you know, the whole range of factors. And even in your plans, think about what happens when people gather before the gig. When they finish, what happens? Again, I'm talking about my plan, but in order to keep my band safe, I think we'll be saying that warming up happens in a distanced way. So on stage rather than in a warm-up room, if we were doing a concert, for instance. And your venue, the venue in which you work, will have its own rules about movement as well. So I think the new normal for us as conductors is to understand venues will be establishing rules that comply with the orders under which they operate. We'll fit within those according to the advice about the distancing, and also bearing in mind the other things we need to do to keep people safe. Do you have a very elderly person attending? Perhaps the advice is for them not to attend because they might be more at risk if something happened. Contact tracing is a huge issue for the health department, and is one of the reasons for the limitation on groups, on the size of groups, because as we saw in other states, when the contact tracing system broke down, things really got out of hand. So if the number of people is limited in a venue, it's not only because of the potential spread, it's because all of those people would need to be contacted very quickly in order to contain the outbreak. That's the other reason that every day the update, you know, focuses on known cause or unknown cause. We'll all get very used to all of this now, and I wish it hadn't happened, Beck. But that's,
look, I wish that the beautiful sunshine today would just burn it all away. I mean, not literally, but like, you know, make it go. Yeah, so thank you, Stephen. I'm really glad you were on board today, because you understand the nuance of all of these situations, and you've got, you know, been doing a lot of great advocacy for the sector, which is really appreciated, and look forward to working with you over the coming weeks on getting this information out.
Thank you, Beck.
So thank you, everyone. My contact details are here. If you have a particular issue you're really uncertain of, or if you want to get some more advice, please don't hesitate to contact me. We will be updating the website this week to reflect all of this information, and to get our recording of this webinar up there so you can share it with people who need to see it. And keep yourselves safe and well, and hope you can join us again soon. Thanks, Stephen.
Bye, Beck.
Bye.